Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I hope you've had your morning coffee. We have a very interesting panel to present to you. All of you are aware of what this law is, Buy American, Hire American. I think it needs no introduction to when I say that, President Trump is the one who's introduced it. It's a very clear mandate that he has stated as far as what he thinks would be the best way to serve American interests. So from that perspective, I'd like to introduce this subject with the help of my panelists. You know this familiar picture and the thumbs up. I want to just summarize some basic. The way I want to break up today's presentation is there's a quick presentation, just familiarize all of you of what the law mandates. That's 1/3 of the presentation. The other third would be us discussing, some questions that should be in Slido. Please go in and check in on it while I'm presenting so that you have your answers. And third is obviously we are open to your questions. What does this, so Buy American, Hire American is an executive order. What is an executive order? It's something that the President of the United States has the authority to dictate into law and necessarily doesn't need the approval of Congress. So that being said, this is something that President Trump did introduce early on into his tenure as a president. And the stated goals are, as the information on the screen states, the objective is to promote a protectionist theory, that American interests are to be protected at any cost. Now, we could have a very vivacious discussion of what is the definition of American interests. I'm sure we'll get into it in our panel discussion. But pretty much the expectation is the laws governing entry in the US protects the workers from abroad, it protects the US interests, and reforms to help ensure the H-1B visa holders are awarded, who are the skilled workers, the highest paid salaries. Now, we did a little bit of the discussion yesterday when we talked about the level 2 wages, and that is where this has culminated into. Level 2 wages became an issue right from, I would say, 2015. Simeo started this, and then it grew and grew and grew over 2016 and 2017 and 2018 and 19. It's become a mandated issue. So that's where I can trace the origins of that particular immigration problem we deal with. The key aspects of this order is, I think overall, and I've had individual conversations with some of you, obviously not all of you, but we are in agreement, we are of the opinion that the aspects, or most aspects of this executive order is for the betterment of not just Americans, but companies like us who are all in this room to adhere to what should be the right thing to do. So there are elements of this executive order which is actually good. If we want to be honest, we could have our own beliefs about how Trump delivers his message, what he says, what he tweets, how erratic or crazy he sounds. Delete all the noise. What I want to focus today on is how do you advance and promote your business, which is the reason why we're here, in the midst of what these requirements are. And if we want to be fair and honest, I think most of us, if not all of us, will agree that the parameters that this law tries to promote is actually good. And that's the discussion we're going to have over the course of this presentation. So all employers here and the attorneys supporting them should have no problem with being consistent with employers encouraging to verify employment eligibility. We know E-Verify. We know, the I-9 regulations, which have been a thing for the last few decades. It's become more stringent, but it's something that we should be doing anyway. FDNS site visits, as you all know, have increased because a byproduct of this also, where you should be consistent with the data that you're putting on the I-129 form, whether it's an H, whether it's an L, whether it's a TN, whatever it may be, which is, I don't think, a bad thing, in all honesty. So combating fraud and abuse is a very big thing for this administration and should be a very big thing for employers in this room. Data transparency and reports, we've seen a fair amount of that information, at least in my presentation yesterday with the RFEs, where you were pretty much aware of exactly what the national data is, which was not sometimes forthcoming with other administrations with the USCIS. We know quite transparently what the approval rates are, quite transparently what the level of our RFEs are. So data transparency is something else we can benefit from. There are some guidelines to the policy, such as it clarifies what the ACPIA fee should be, depending on the petition type. I don't want to get into exactly what it is. You know, most of you know between first extension, second extension, amendment. If anybody has a question, you can meet us outside. Third-party placement requirements. We discussed this also yesterday, where you have to show the link between the petitioner and the end client. Whether you're a direct vendor with your own MSA, or you have mid-vendors, whatever the setup may be, that has to be transparent if you want the petition to be approved. Relationship between L entities, that's a very big deal also, which we covered in the RFE yesterday, where you must prove very transparently if there is a parent, branch, subsidiary, joint venture, any relationship between the two entities. Therefore, you should be eligible and deserve the L1 visa, amongst other criteria. 1 year foreign employment requirement. This is something that has been mandated also with a clarification that it has to be 1 year continuous. And that is something that was new to us. You know, we could get away with kind of aggregating, accumulating. In the past, that is no longer the case. Clearly, we have seen proof of the last bullet, which is the H1 master's cap selection process has definitely improved chances for candidates with US masters. Most of you, if not all of you, are very familiar with these trends. Denial rates are up from 2015 by at least a minimum of 6%, and up to 32 in the first quarter of 2019. Up to 40.2% of H1 cases are RFE'd. We all know there is a distinct increase in FDNS site visits. There is definitely an increase in 221Gs, which is a session that we will have later this afternoon to discuss that primarily. The FOIA filed by USCIS shows or directs adjudicators to restrict H-1B approvals and increase RFEs. This is something we see in practice, but it is a fact that there is a mandate, whether it is, I doubt whether it's from President Trump directly, but it could be from Stephen Miller, it could be from Jared Kushner, because that's how this administration works, has specifically mandated both USCIS adjudicators in the service centers and those at the consulates to make sure there is a minimum quota of denials or RFEs that are met. That's just the fact. And because of the FOIA, it's been proven true. However, there has been a record number of H approvals, as the data also informs us. 389,000 H-1Bs cases were approved. It is a fact that it is more difficult to get cases approved, as we've had lengthy discussions yesterday. However, it is also a fact that if you have a well-prepared case, your cases are more likely to get approved. Like we discussed in detail yesterday also, it is our belief at USI Law that if you put in all the ingredients from the get-go, you improve your chances of increasing approvals. Acting Director Ken Cuccelli, who's no longer in his position, unfortunately, basically was mandated, and I'm sure his replacement has the same mandate, of delivering on President Trump's promise to his electorate, his base, of making sure American interests are protected. Given the climate, given this hire American, buy American, this is, at least for us, our stats for approvals. So I reiterate our claim that if there is a properly filed petition, it will be looked at, it will be reviewed, and you will see it in your approval rates. To just highlight on some of the points that I might have just mentioned before, clarification on how to calculate accurate fees, initial and extension petitions to receive the same scrutiny. What do we mean by that? Because this was one of the questions I got at the end of the RFE. Why should there be more scrutiny at the end if I've already gotten a 3-year approval and the system is already approved for the same for a national? Why shouldn't there be, would be my counter question to you. Because if you are renewing a visa after 3 years, if you are amending a visa after 6 months, why won't there be an additional scrutiny? Because what a petition looks into is just not, hypothetically, Mr. Reddy's or Srinivas Reddy's case. It re-reviews the petition. You have to prove at the first go the petitioner. It reviews the position being offered. It reviews the qualifications of the beneficiary. It reviews, if you have an end client, the relationship between the end client and the petitioner. What work do you have for this end client at the petitioner's site, end client site, et cetera, et cetera. So in 3 years, it's foreseeable there will be some changes, right? Life doesn't stay stagnant. So why won't they re-review it again? Secondly, if you have an amendment, 2 of the several categories that I just listed, only 2 are the same. As in, the petitioner is the same, the beneficiary's qualifications are the same. Nothing changes there. Everything else changes. With a new engagement, like if you go from company A to company B, you, the employer, obviously will engage in a separate MSA, separate SOW, separate PO. So the rules of engagement, even for you and the end client, has changed. So therefore, the supporting petition obviously has a significant change. Why won't it be re-evaluated, in all fairness? And therefore, in my professional opinion, it should be re-reviewed and then be approved based on the merits of the case. Meaning, for us, what do we take from this? We have to prepare the petition, qualifying everything, meeting all the requirements, again, irrespective of whether it's an amendment, extension, transfer, fresh H, as far as the way we view it at USI law. Third-party documentation, clearly that has tightened over the course of this year, even last year. The petitioner must demonstrate specific and non-speculative qualifying assignments in the specialty occupation for the entire time requested. I got a question yesterday after my session where basically I was asked that, what if the SOW is only good for 6 months, 9 months, 12 months? All of us in the same industry, for the most part, if I can generalize in this room, and SOWs don't go on for multi-years. It is for short terms. It is MSAs that go on for multi-years. But with that restriction, every petition that is prepared should have the goal. How you implement it is based on your capability and experience and your own, tricks of the trade. But you should at least try and push for a 3-year request and then align documentation accordingly. Next important thing, which we just touched base on, relationship between the entities is a very big thing for L1 visas. They're RFing that a lot. 1-year employment requirement, that is something for continuous 1 year is something they're looking at. And then the master's cap, we've already touched base, is something that is fair to the advantage of US master visa holders. At the end of it all, I must say that there is still a distinct demand for, if I can again generalize, considering the people in the room, for IT professionals in America. As I very rapidly tell any person that I'm having a conversation with about the subject, please explain to me which employer, if they had available talent in the US in the form of a green card holder, in the form of a US citizen, would go through the trouble of paying anywhere between close to $8,000, because if you look at 6460 plus 1410 for the premium processing, if you have to pay for that, or if you're a smaller company or a non-dependent company that doesn't have to pay the $4,000, reduce that by $4,000, but at least close to $4,000 if you go for 2460 and then 1410. Who would pay that kind of money? And I'm not even counting for legal fees on top of that, if you had available talent on your fingertips. Or as I affectionately say, if outside the door you could line up 10 Americans who had the talent, which employer would go through the pain of dealing with a USCIS application, pain of an RFE, pain of the heartburn of maybe getting approval, maybe getting a denial? It makes no sense. So I guess that means there is some amount of job security for all of us, meaning that talent is required. Definitely I can say IT talent is required. And a part of what we will discuss as a panel is, if we are to address the elephant in the room, there is definitely now a target on IT professionals from India. There's no mincing my words about that. So how do we handle that new trend that we've experienced under this new president is something we'll get into. The president claims that he wants to orient US immigration policies to support skilled workers. In this regard, you've heard this also, this is no new news, that he wants to model the immigration system of Canada and Australia, where point-based system would be honored. I think we're in very good territory if that's what they shift to, because what we do is skilled worker immigration. Administration has hinted at removing per-country limitations. On a lighter note, I really had my hopes up that when Prime Minister Modi came and he hugged it out with President Trump, that something would come out of the Howdy Modi Houston conference. To my dismay, and hopefully most of the people in this room, nothing came out of that, but it's still on the table. There's a lot of lobbying money by Indian companies that are going into this, considering all of you know the visa bulletin situation of unavailable visas for EB2s at 2009, EB3s are even further, EB1s have now retrogressed to 2015. I can speak on, Rohit on my behalf and other people experienced in this room, nobody has seen an EB1C retrogress this badly, or EB1s period, especially for India. So it is what it is. There is a lot of pressure to make that remove the per country limitations and make that current. Clearly, India is the one country that's hurt the most, followed by China. Clearly, also, the truth is, there are way too many Indian applications in the pipeline, the reason being that's causing the backlog. So that's the end of my presentation. I want to open it up to our questions that we had prepared yesterday. What lies ahead? Predictions for 2020. We're not answering that yet. We want to get your answer first. Nobody has signed on? It's 000.
It's time to sign back on to Slido.
I guess we should start.
Hashtag INSZoom, yeah.
Praveen, you want to take a shot at it?
If I have to go with one word, I'd say uncertainty. Yeah, but to be a little more verbose, which I usually am, I think the big point which we all await is what happens to the new H1 lottery system, right? And I've spoken to pretty much every lawyer in the room, and everybody seems to have an opinion about it. I would say in the statistics I've gathered, 60% feel it's not going to go through, 40% feel it's likely to go through. So I'll go with the majority because simply I believe you guys are more informed about it than I. And that is the big thing, because it could be a game changer at several levels for us, and that's one thing. And then the second big question is what happens in the elections of 2020. A little before that, what happens to the impeachment hearing, probably a little before that. So there are some big questions on the table. Absolutely. And yeah, it's an exciting year ahead, to say the least.
Jake, you want to add anything?
I agree with it's going to be uncertain. I think there are opportunities on the horizon. You were talking about this. Many of these changes are probably helping in some ways to strengthen the integrity of the programs that exist. Probably not so many of the people in this room would submit something that was not completely true to the Immigration Service. I think the companies here are concerned about doing it the right way. That's why we're here, hopefully. But not everyone is like you. Not everyone is like us, that we would, that we would do it the right way or try to. And so in some ways, many of these changes are creating a culture where doing it the wrong way is going to get you in trouble, where maybe before you could slip under the radar.
Which is a good thing.
Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, arguably it's a good thing. It's creating more work for everybody, but hopefully it's strengthening the program overall.
Rohit?
First of all, I just wanted to say good morning to everybody and thank you all for coming out at a relatively early hour in Bangalore, considering the traffic, so appreciate you all being here. Anindita has obviously made lots of comments which would invite a discussion which is going to go well beyond the time over here. But I think clearly, like Praveen also said, I think certainty of the uncertainty seems to be the order of the day. I think we're all going to look at many, many different things. I think if I had to use one word, I think it would be compliance. That's something that our firm has pushed for years on end. Our clients are aware of that, they know that, and I think that's going to continue to encompass all the different aspects that Anindita has identified, and I think we're all probably on the same page, and if we're not, at the end of this conference, hopefully we've all got there.
I think that's a perfect summary of what we can expect going down the pike. Oh, I can't move this. Next question. Next question, please. What are the chances Trump will get reelected?
Are we talking about Baja or are we talking about politics?
Everything links up into Trump, right? It's Trump's Baja. So at least 3 members have said high chances, 100%, 60-40, 20%. Panelists, what is your opinion?
I'm going to go with high.
Again, I'm led by what I hear from everybody, and I think people tell me there is just no opposition, and there's a very good chance he would come back. I'd wait for Jake. And then
Yeah. American voting system does not necessarily coincide with the popular vote because of the electoral college system that exists. So it means that even though there may be fewer voters liking Trump, it represents a bigger span of the actual physical geography of America. So the middle of America is voting for Trump mostly. And the system does not reward the coastal regions that are supporting the anti-Trump agenda as much. So I think because of that system, there's a high probability he'll be there again.
And Anindita, if I may add, I think here we have a president who's doing everything he promised he would do at the time he went into campaign in 2016.
Absolutely.
So
He's
intuitively, if
delivering to
a
his
president
base.
delivers on all his promises, he should get re-elected. I mean,
Absolutely.
despite that being that
Yeah.
I'll build a wall, I'll put embargo on Chinese goods, so on and so forth. But if the middle America has voted him in on the basis of these promises, I think he's delivered largely on those promises, much more than other politicians which we've seen around the world. So if they voted and they've got what they voted for, there is a strong chance that he may come back again.
Absolutely.
Investments, people who invest in their retirements are seeing, record results. The NASDAQ exchange reached an all-time high just recently. So all of these strong economic factors, even though they hate him as a person and his tweeting and all of the things that he does, sometimes money speaks louder than everything else.
What positive contribution has Trump made in the immigration laws and processes that benefit India? We have clean and quality immigration, increase salaries for IT professionals and focus on compliance, curb illegal immigration, not take things for granted, everything good for US citizens and skilled employees, no comment, stopping illegal immigration, removal of per country cap, well, he hasn't done the removal yet, none, maybe to visitors, EB-5 visas, made in India, by Indian, is what the Prime Minister here is promoting. So I guess that's a summary of. Overall, I think I have not had the opportunity or chance or ability to look at quarter earnings for each one of the companies represented in this room. But my understanding is no matter how cumbersome and harassing US immigration has become, and obviously we're focused on Trump, so I'm doing US immigration here, it has definitely not hurt your company as far as net figures are concerned. If you're aggressive, the economy, the US economy is booming, as all of you know, and overall, Trump does support business immigration. Republicans in general support business immigration, and that's the truth.
Anindita, I have to take a slightly contrarian view here, representing corporates. While you're right, I mean, no company has gone into losses because Trump has made these changes. What it has definitely inserted is two things. One, in the democratic dispensation, perhaps, the idea of immigration was the illegal immigrants on the Mexican border. It was largely those undocumented workers, so on and so forth. President Trump has brought business immigration to a mainstream agenda. It's become a part of the public conscience that somebody else is coming and stealing my jobs, etc. in America. And it has brought immigration to be a boardroom conversation among CXOs in India, for example. Right? What it's also inserted at a tactical level is a huge amount of uncertainty, especially the scrutiny of an extension filing, for example. If you have been found good to qualify for a certain standard 3 years back, the only thing you need to check now is, do you still have that the need for you to stay? Have you been legal all along, etc. But your qualification for that need not necessarily be tested again. I mean, your qualification cannot decrease, it can only increase. So raising a question about that is an unnecessary thing, and it inserts unpredictability. Businesses can handle certainty of a denial if they know they won't apply for it. But the uncertainty and unpredictability hurts them a lot, because as it is, you got to apply in April for a petition which comes in October, or if you're filing an extension,
or
it
later.
takes months. And then there's a commercial impact, right? An RFE costs more time and money. Extension going wrong, somebody has built a good rapport with the clients, that hurts. So there are impacts. What it certainly has done is force companies to rethink their business model. If earlier 90% of certain companies, 80% of their US payroll was assignees from other countries, now probably there's a focus on hiring much more locally, which is showing up on the bottom line. The profit margins are gently impacted. But I saw one of the responses that companies will get creative about how to get past that. Right. I'm sure they will, but there is definitely an impact. And unfortunately, when you cut the grass, everything, good and bad grass, everything gets cut, while the intent may have been to, and in terms of impact, I think if you look at the approval rates, the Microsoft, Googles of the world are still recording 95, 96% plus approval rates, which are great. The good companies are a little lower, but where it's hurt most is probably the body shoppers who essentially exist on the fringes of how the boundaries of the law, and they have been hurt more, which at an intent level has served the purpose right. But there is an impact on some aspect, but I'm sure business will find ways to get around that. There are positives too. I'm just speaking of the impact from a corporate perspective.
No, absolutely.
Just two comments from my end. One, I think it clearly has raised the salaries of the IT professionals. Absolutely. Because we're all talking about the dangers of going with level 1 versus level 2. I think that's a positive for sure from the IT workers' perspective. I think secondly, and I think I see that as an impasse, having an impact on your US organization, but by the same token, I think the system in the US requires the business to come to India if it's not being done by Indians in the US, which means while your payroll may be affected in the US, your profit margins may be affected in the US, I think from an Indian perspective, you're still going to see better profits or see pretty much the same thing. That's what I think. You're on the corporate side, you maybe have a completely different view of that perspective, though.
You're right. Possibly that could be a fact, but look, I mean, I think it's also, in a sense, a result of how many companies had over-leveraged the boundaries of what was the law earlier. I'm not saying they did anything illegal. For example, stacking up 90% of your H1 guys on a level 1 wage. Now that's clearly over-leveraging a certain position. So just by moving up a large chunk of that, maybe that 90% is now reduced to 60 or even lesser, 30% on level 1, the rest being in level 2, that has made an impact on a large chunk of your assignee population in terms of wages moving up by $5,000 or $7,000. So yeah, I mean, it's a left pocket, right pocket transaction. Your US company may record more, but your Indian companies record less. But when I look at it in the larger picture, the demographics are completely against it. There aren't enough skilled people in the US, A. B, the pathway to a permanent residency is, you spoke about how retrogress the green cards are. So beyond a certain number of years, there is very little certainty for a person to stay on unless you go on renewing your H1s year on year, et cetera, which could come into scrutiny, so on and so forth. So there are those difficulties which start showing up as a strain on business over a period of time. And companies have changed strategies. Like almost every company I know of is looking to hire much more aggressively in the US, which is great for the US market. But then when you look at it, there's just not enough skills. You get into a big problem. Today, the US is recording probably the lowest unemployment rates in the last 50 years. Great, but what happens next? You're scooping up even the bottom of the barrel because you need somebody locally. A couple of years from now, and couple that with the tax breaks President Trump has given to the corporations to set up companies in the US, if they set up companies and they need people, where they're going to get people from if you continue to have barriers which are much higher.
Absolutely.
Right? University admissions are dropping. So there are several connected parameters which could probably hurt in the longer run, while immediately you see a benefit of the business booming and the unemployment rates being quite low. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that the story that's being told from Trump, or the kind of the feeling that's coming through, is the biggest problem. He's making people to feel unwanted or unappreciated for the contribution, instead of just focusing on the integrity of the program like we were talking about, which is a positive thing to talk about, that this could be a improvement in the system and more truth in the applications that are filed. Instead, it's talking about taking jobs or demonizing the people that are coming to do the work here for whatever reason, whatever purpose. It maybe boils down to some kind of racism or something like that, I think. But that part doesn't serve any purpose. It just creates more tension, and it's not creating solutions. And like Praveen mentioned, it's driving people away from coming to university in some cases, or other opportunities where they just feel maybe they'll go where they feel more appreciated.
Well, I think it's serving his base. And like Anindita said earlier, maybe we can try to cut out the noise. That's a strange comment to come from somebody who's born and raised in Calcutta, and for me from Bombay. Noise just is part of life. But I think clearly there are some positives. He's just not presenting it well, and yet he knows how to play the media extremely well.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch upon the positives, there have been clear indicators, right? The prevention of fraud is a good thing. I mean, I think I can without doubt say all the companies here do the right thing, and they take extensive pains to do the right thing. So it should only help them, because they are unlike, I mean, I accept that nobody could be perfect. There could be a few things here and there, but largely I think they should only benefit from things being positive, right? And his focus on trying to get highly skilled workers, I leave the highly paid workers on the side for the moment. But I think we should stand to gain, because India as a country is producing a lot of highly skilled workers.
This is the base.
This is the base. So sooner rather than later, it should work in our favor. Maybe it's the sine curve, you dip a bit, but you come back to get more advantage later. And then transparency in reports. It makes our life a lot more easier to put stuff up in front of our leadership saying, look, this is what the statistics are. Earlier, it would just be anecdotal evidence or hearsay at best. And that's a big advantage which we see. The H-1B selection process for US master's degree holders, I think India and China are the largest senders of students to study in the US for STEM master's degrees in STEM. They should stand to benefit. At the end of it, there is a pool available, and if they focus on this, and they should stand to benefit. And I think there are some positives. I wouldn't say everything is negative, but maybe the narrative or the way it comes through when looking from India, it turns out to be fairly bad. Yeah.
Negative, yeah. There's definitely is. I'm happy Jake said it rather than the three of us on the panel. There is some amount. I don't want to open it up for discussion, because this is not what we do here, and we are not that type of professional. But then the unsaid truth is there is a fair amount of racism now, and the new target is brown people. So it is what it is. Could we move on to the next slide, please? We're done. We've addressed this. Next. Do you feel there's some merit in what is occurring in our immigration world? I think we've discussed that also between, what is the right thing to do and taking it to a different level to educators' base. If we could just skip that, please. I think the next couple of questions, we've addressed it already. Has Canada benefited due to the immigration hurdles in the US?
Yeah, I think that was kind of addressed yesterday, where Canada seems to be the biggest beneficiary of the hurdles in the US. And I think I kind of kid around with people when they ask me about Canada and say, listen, above that 1 millimeter above the North America borderline, if you're going to be a lumberjack, Canada is fine. Otherwise, I think you still have to stay with the US. The opportunities are there, and I think that's still the go-to place at any point in time.
Next question.
Mr. Canada?
I agree. I mean, in the immediate term, it looks like there is a certain benefit because they're seeing an uptake. We spoke in the panel yesterday. They see an uptake of about 16.5% in university admissions. So in the longer run, it should play out better. There are a lot more people willing to migrate. I think Carmen mentioned 139 new flights from San Francisco to Toronto. Amazon, Starbucks, and Microsoft trying to mirror their facilities in Seattle, in Vancouver. So there is a lot of action there. But I think for me, what's the most interesting thing is Canada's approach to be relevant is they've taken an approach of trying to get skills and good talent in, and they're kind of showcasing that to get investments in. So investments are almost sequential to good talent being made available. But in terms of sheer size of economic opportunity, US is leaps and bounds ahead of where Canada is. So, and then in terms of attractiveness of foreign talent, US still is the #1 spot, though Canada is second. And more foreign workers want to work in the US than in Canada. Maybe the slightly warmer climates also
I was just going to say it's very cold, at least on the East Coast.
But I think also the education system in Canada is very comparable in terms of quality, and certainly a heck of a lot cheaper than the US, even at their top university. So that could be having an impact as well.
One of the other interesting points which Amarpal pointed to last evening is it's not just the volume of college admissions which Canada is seeing an uptick in. 3 years back, if the cutoff was about 88%, it moved to 92% in the next year. This year, it's hovering about 95%. So they're already asking for people who are better. They're getting better people into their system. So we shouldn't be too surprised if in the next 10 years, the new Facebooks or Googles of the world come from some Canadian university students.
That's a tragedy.
Yeah, and US is recording a 2.5% dip in their foreign students' admissions. So in the long run, there is a lot of promise. That's all right. It's too early to say, but in the long run, it's a big gamble, right? I mean, you have investments and then you attract people, or you get people and attract investment. So they're two different channels, and Canada's taken the second one. So it's a long shot. I hope there is continuity of their friendly immigration policy. Justin Trudeau's come back with a lesser mandate, but doesn't seem like there's a directional change there. They're very clear that the workforce growth will come from immigrants. The demographics need that. So yeah, I'm quite hopeful about how this could turn out in the future.
But I think if we take a step back, the Canadian investment program, which was somewhat similar to the US's EB-5, has been very, very curtailed. They've cut it off except for one province, and I think they've also done that because they didn't want one part of the world just migrating to Canada and taking it over, which was similar to what's happening in the US EB-5. So you balance all of that out, and obviously there's a lot of give and take over there.
Absolutely. I think the immediate future, US is leaps and bounds ahead. I mean, just the sheer size of the economy, I think there's so many more opportunities. Canada, I think the economic activity is just a sliver which kind of borders the US boundary, and thereapart there's 5,000 miles of forest, if you may, right?
Yeah, so I don't think anybody in this room qualifies to be a lumberjack. Maybe Jake, but not otherwise.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into the healthcare discussion, so let's leave it at that. I think we've covered the last two questions also, the last one being, is your company benefiting from the current immigration state of affairs? I think we've discussed that.
You want to queue up the questions?
Yeah.
Is there any Q&A from the audience?
I'd like to really see the one gentleman or lady has said yes, so we'd like to hear where is that coming through? So maybe you've got something to share with the others. Okay.
So maybe I can ask a question. I think Purvi is going to address it later on, but since we're on there, we talked about the change in the H1 selection process, the H1B selection
Yeah,
process. Frankly, I don't see how, and they've talked about the fact that it's going to increase by 16%, the probability. It just seems to me a very convoluted way of trying to increase the 16%. And I was chatting with Purvi last night, and I was like, why don't you just simplify it and say, we're going to select all the master's degree holders, and then whatever is left, we're going to throw into the pool for whatever is left out of the 85. I mean, as opposed to saying, yeah,
That's an intelligent way of looking at it, because the US has invested in the education of these candidates.
And you're getting a lot of people
And you don't
who
want
are
to send the
spending
talent
money
back.
on the masters. This way, you're also addressing the issue of people who may be less qualified, and you're taking care of the universities and their master's degrees and encouraging people. And Indians do usually end up with a master's degree.
Yeah.
In most cases, ones who go from here.
I agree. I mean, it's a very radical thought, and maybe it's one that will resonate.
I thought it was
in
logical,
the US.
not radical, but that's okay.
Radically logical thought. Let me put it that way. But I would take one step back. By the definition of what qualifies for a specialty occupation, it does not say you need to have a master's degree. And if you insist on something like this, you're probably deviating from what the stated intent of the specialty occupation is. So unless you go back and make that change, you're unfairly, saying, because all occupations may not need a master's degree, which are specialty in nature. There could be a lot of, say, Y2K, for example, a famous example. You need a lot of coders just trying to look through a lot of code, make very subtle changes, but they need to look through millions of lines of code. That doesn't need a master's degree. But unless you go back to the statute and make changes at what qualifies as specialty occupation, I think this would be a little bit of a stretch.
No, I completely agree with you on that. But considering the number of deviations we have at this point in time, I don't know if it really matters. If you're trying to get the best, if you're trying to hire the best, then...
But then I'll ask Anindita and Jake, would you feel confident enough to file a lawsuit that this is unfair and no?
It's a waste of time.
Yeah.
Waste of time. Oh.
No. It's a waste
Then I'm a
of time
little
and
worried now.
No, it's a waste of time.
And maybe every IT company in India should be worried because their entire hiring model goes out of the window.
Work's just going to come back to India.
Somebody mentioned make in India, buy in India. So that becomes, so we are also protectionist to that extent, right? Made
Every
in India
country, and this is what we were discussing yesterday,
is a variant of that, maybe not so aggressive, but it is a variant in that sense. Yeah.
We see it in a lot of countries today. You know, if you look across the globe, and the extremists are winning, unfortunately. You pick, I can think of 10 countries right now. And the last election that was held in the last 12 months is a very scary turn of events.
Brexit is a big example of that.
Brexit is a perfect example. Okay, we only have 3 minutes, so let's quickly dabble on some of the things that we might not have addressed. Will Baha reduce hiring from other countries? I think we've addressed that. It is what it is. Talent is required in the US. We just have to comply with the craziness that we call US immigration today and still, work with the system and get our approvals.
You mentioned there's record numbers of approvals, so it doesn't seem to be reducing the number of people working under H1 or L1 programs, but it's creating that, extra tension around all of it, for sure.
Apart from L1s or H1s, do we have any choice in J visas for working professionals? This will take some time. Come to any of the panelists here. We'll discuss it with you. There is a J1 program, which is an exchange visa program. There's a sponsorship requirement. There has to be companies certified to sponsor. So that could be something if you want to be creative and think out of the box. That's not an employment visa. It's a temporary visa just for training primarily. So that might not be or should not be your go-to in replacement of H or L.
Yeah, and that's only for 18 months.
Exactly. Is there a minimum salary payable for L1 visas under US immigration? There is no prevailing wage, but some companies even could keep you on the foreign payroll, but you should at least have room and board per diem. Most companies have a setup, and some even have a half and half, pay something in the US, maintain the India salary abroad. Comments, panelists?
Yeah, just one comment there, because L1 by nature is a specialized knowledge work permit or a multinational executive work permit, the expectation is that they are pegged a notch or two higher than where the H1s would be. So while there are no minimum wage slabs, be conscious about what you pay, either as a mix of what you pay in India or allowances or a total salary in the US. But the underlying expectation is the way it is perceived is they are a notch higher than the H1, so the salary should reflect that.
That's right.
Yeah, I wouldn't even consider an L1, a level 1 at that point in time. It shouldn't
Absolutely.
even be on the radar.
Absolutely.
When you're
I mean,
doing
if
an
you're
L1.
calling a manager cannot be an L1 if you want to comparably come up with what would be a fair salary. H4 EADs will be no more in the future. There is definitely a threat. We don't know how that's going to pan out. That's definitely something we're very anxious about because we all know somebody, who's going to be affected by that. But that is on the chopping block.
Yeah, but on a much, much lighter note, I wouldn't accept or reject a marriage proposal based on the H4 EAD's ability to work.
Still trying, Rohit?
Yeah.
I get that question all the time. Will my wife or will my son or my daughter be allowed to work if they go marry an H1? It's not even a full
No, it is a very
understanding.
big deal. And
Yeah,
I
but
try
it's
to
not even a full understanding of when you qualify for it.
And I mean, I was not made aware. When AC21, I don't know, for some of us who've been in the field for over a couple of decades, it's very interesting how big business works, right? Acquia brought in, or the AC21 law brought in L2 EADs, which is why, because H4 and L2s were being lobbied at the same time. But big business has deep pockets, has big money, AKA money talks. So L2s were approved, and nobody's talking about them being threatened. H4s, as you all know, came way later down the pike, and now that's definitely on the chopping block. And I was actually educated about this maybe 4 or 5 years ago. I said, how is this a big deal? I mean, I went as an immigrant, I went as a student, transferred over to an H, then got my green card, and the rest is history. But I didn't understand what a psychological effect it has to the spouses. I hate to be sexist, but mostly women. It is a major issue. If you have qualified women, and I speak to everybody sitting in this room, we know how much our culture prioritizes education. So, whether you're a girl or a boy, the expectation, depending on the ethnicity you come from in India, is a minimum for bachelor's. In some cases, definitely in South India, and the state I'm from, a minimum for PhD, if you can go that high. So if I have that qualification and I just have to be a homemaker, it's a huge mental adjustment, and especially if I've had a professional career in India and then to move to the US and just have nothing to do with no opportunity. That was the state of the H4s, and there is a threat that they might go back to that. So that is a real concern.
Yep, I think it's time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Time's up is the
Thank you, panel.
flashing timer.
Rohit.
I hope
Thank you.
you guys learned something from this panel. Thank you, panelists. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
So stay here. There's some appreciations, I think, coming from our INSZoom prize team, prize patrol. Our other panelists were previously given
you.
some recognitions, but excellent. Thank you. Thanks so much. It's time for a break to go and refresh yourselves. Come back. We'll continue with all the good times.